It might be hard to believe, but Stammer was a rubbish tip not so many years ago, the haunt of foxes, seagulls, hawkers, doggers and gypsies. No, there were gypsies there, I'm not just saying that to be offensive. Now look at it. Who says landfill is bad? If it had remained open ground, there'd probably be a Sainsbury's on it these days. I spent most of my childhood round Stanah and Skippool because we lived just down the lane. In fact, my sister still lives on Rakes Road. There was a cafe at Stammer in those days. It burned down. So they built the Ecology Centre run by the mighty morphing Wyre Rangers, which, despite its popularity, was eventually sold off by Wyre Borough Council. Now it's a cafe again. The only difference is that nowadays the bogs cost 30 pence to use. 30 pence to spend a penny, that's inflation for you, of both the fiscal and of the bladder variety. It's a good job there are plenty of bushes around. The pylon's still here. Originally it stood alone on the top of Stammer Hill, like some vast naked Ray Harryhausen creation, enticing drunks to stand beneath it and sing Bright Eyes. Now it's surrounded by woods that crackle when it rains. And there was Cockle Hall, but that's gone now. Not that there was ever much of it to start off with. Presumably the hall bit was meant to be ironic, as the entire estate consisted of a tiny farm worker's cottage occupied by a tenant farmer who liked to call himself the Squire, and his 13 children. Obviously there wasn't much else to do round Stanner back in those days. Apparently they had to take it in turns to use the bed. According to Ralph Smedley's Thornton Cleaveley's Remembered, alas, no carriage and pair ever swept up to the front door of Cockle Hall. No liveried retainer ever speeded the parting guests. Why it was ever called Cockle Hall, I don't know, but it was bought by Thornton Cleaveley's council over 30 years ago and demolished. It had a ferry, the steps of which are still just about visible in the marsh, which ran to the Wardleys pub. People had to whistle across the river to call it. Presumably they had more powerful lungs back then. Before the ferry, there was a ford connecting the Roman road across the summit of Stanner Hill to the ancient Portus. You can still make out the agger of the Roman road, cutting through the medieval hedgerow at an angle, when the grass is short enough and the sunlight's at just the right angle. Unfortunately, neither were when we were filming, so you'll just have to believe us. On the far side of the hill is the boggart field, where one local farmer, whose name I won't mention, partly out of consideration for his anonymity and partly because I've forgotten it, swore blind that he'd never set welly for fear of getting caught by the hairy boggart. A painful experience, I've been informed. Anyhow, nowadays Cockle Hall has been reduced to a pile of picnic tables and an old stile permanently pinioned in the mud. It's time to move on, following the curve of the River Wyre to Skippool Creek. Before we get there, however, let's have a ghost story. One summer's evening, many years ago, two young ladies were cycling down the lanes around Stanah and Skippool when they noticed a patch of light approaching. Believing it to be the baker's van, they climbed off their bikes and waited patiently on the verge. But it wasn't a vehicle at all, at least not of any recognisable sort. The eerie light continued past them in silence, as Kathleen Eyre recalls.
Later, one of the girls mentioned the incident to her father. He looked thoughtful for a moment, then told her that the spectacle had been seen before, always before the outbreak of war. The cycling expedition took place in 1939.
Who knows, perhaps it was the boggart from Underbank Road out for an evening stroll stroke float. At Skippool stands Thornton Lodge, formerly, during my more drunken years, the Buccaneer, and before that, something else, no doubt. It's older than it looks. Back in 1627, according to the Lancashire court rolls, it was allegedly owned by a witch. Always remembering that back in those times, the penalty for witchcraft was a personalised foretaste of Guy Fawkes Night. Dorothy, wife of Thomas Shaw of Skippool, she was called. Thomas Shaw was black, apparently, which might have had something to do with the accusation. Dottie's neighbour, William Wilkinson, called her a demdike and a witch, harsh words indeed, claiming,
"Thou art a witch, God bless me! I am afraid for my wife, children and goods,"
although not necessarily in that order. Fortunately, the courts weren't convinced and threw the case out. Just beyond the yacht club, where in 2009 Gary Thornton of Wyre Archaeology unearthed the Roman coin, there's another ancient ford, or at least there was. The cuttings are still there, but predictably the ford itself is now gone. It was called Bulka, an ancient Norse name referring to cargo, or cows or something. Unfortunately, when we were filming, it was a very hot day and we ran out of steam before we reached it. We had a better photograph of it than this one once as well, but we don't know where it is now. We're a bit crap sometimes, aren't we? We also heard reports over the years from those in the know of Roman finds and roundhouses and all sorts of other ancient stuff being unearthed from the field now occupied by the water board. We could tell you some stories about the alleged shenanigans there, but for legal reasons it's best we didn't. It's pleasant at Skippool on a summer's afternoon when the tide hasn't flooded the road, or at least it was. The rich and the tasteless, not mutually exclusive traits, have moved into the area. What were once quaint riverside cottages with wisteria growing round their porches are now crew-cut piles with sentry boxes and bucket loads of suspicion. Somewhere down the line, the sea-swept nostalgia of childhood gave way to tasteless gouache. And along with the Illawalla, a stately crackerbox demolished some years ago now to make way for bungalows, something important's been lost. There's loads more stuff, but we haven't got loads more time. We have to pack up now and edit this rubbish. Click like, subscribe if you want. Probably won't, but we always suggest it anyhow. And join us again next week, when, all being well, we'll be back with another Lancashire Footnote.